Have you ever wondered how weather forecasting apps predict the weather conditions? They use code, much like the one we're about to explore. Our aim? To fetch and display weather data. Our code is divided into three main functions. The first is fetch weather data. This function's job is to reach out to a weather API, a kind of digital library, and grab the current weather data for a given location. Next, we have the display weather function. This one checks whether we have weather data available. If we do, it shows us the current temperature and weather conditions. If not, it lets us know that the data isn't available. Finally, we have the update weather function. This function is the orchestrator. It calls on fetch weather data to get the weather data. Then it calls on display weather to show us the data it's received. So this is a basic structure of how a weather forecasting app may work. Now let's dive into each function to understand how they're coded. Firstly, we have the fetch weather data function, which fetches the weather data from an API. Now this function is the powerhouse of our weather forecasting code. It's designed to simulate an API call, a task that involves reaching out to a dedicated weather service and bringing back the desired weather data. The function fetch weather data accepts a single parameter, which is the location. This is the specific place for which we want to fetch the weather data. This could be a city, a town, or even a country. Inside the function, we're simulating an API call to fetch the weather data. Once the data is fetched, the function updates two key variables, current temperature and current weather condition. These variables hold the most recent temperature and weather condition data fetched from the API. So, fetch weather data is responsible for getting the weather data from an API and updating our temperature and weather condition variables. Next, we have the display weather and update weather functions. The display weather function begins by checking if the weather data is available. This is done by verifying that the variables current temperature and current weather condition aren't null. If the data is present, the function proceeds to print the current temperature and weather condition. Should the data be unavailable, an error message is displayed, alerting the user to try again later. Now, let's turn to the update weather function. This function is the driving force behind updating the weather data. It does so by calling the fetch weather data function with a provided location. Once the data is fetched, it calls the display weather function to display the updated weather information. So in essence, the update weather function is like a director, orchestrating the process of fetching and displaying the weather data. Meanwhile, the display weather function is the performer, bringing the data to the forefront for the user to see. In summary, the update weather function fetches the latest weather data and displays it, while the display weather function is responsible for the actual display of the data. So we've explained each function in our weather forecasting code, but what does it all mean? In essence, we start with defining variables to hold our weather data. Next, we use the fetch weather data function to retrieve weather data from an API. The display weather function checks if the data is available and then presents it. The update weather function calls the previous two functions to fetch and display the data. And that, in essence, is how a basic weather forecasting code works. It fetches weather data, checks its availability, and then displays it to the user. It's all about the right data at the right time.